Thank you for joining. The release of AI technologies like ChatGPT, DALL-E, Gemini, and Midjourney has led to a rapid rise in their use for making everything from video news deepfakes to science fiction stories. These technologies are advancing rapidly, making it hard to reliably tell when AI has been used as part of the content creation process. So does it matter to people if AI was used if they can't tell the difference anymore? So far, the argument appears to be yes, because of the dangers of hallucinations and fears about how much easier it is to create misinformation. As illustrated by these headlines, the response has been a call from regulators, experts, and users to indicate when AI has been used based on the belief that this will help people evaluate the credibility of content. But will this approach work? Prior research on how users evaluate web content credibility suggests that it might, because people rely on superficial signals to make their judgments, such as how easy the site is to navigate or even self-proclaimed expertise. On the other hand, work in algorithmic aversion shows that people tend to exhibit a negative bias toward information they believe is generated by a machine or algorithm, preferring information from a human, even when it has been shown that the machine's output is objectively better. The answer may also be more nuanced. For example, work in web content credibility suggests that the signals used differ between situations of low risk and motivation or high risk and motivation. And although work in algorithmic aversion has demonstrated a negative bias in both objective and subjective contexts, there has been evidence of the opposite effect, of algorithmic appreciation, such as considering computer-created content as more credible. And while most studies have focused on evaluating credibility, sometimes users are looking at content for other reasons, like enjoyment, entertainment, or as a way to build social connections with others. Some work has explored how people received AI-created paintings, finding that they viewed the AI-created work as less meaningful and likable, or that they showed a preference for human-created poetry. Other work found that people felt computer-created articles were more pleasant to read. These studies highlight alternate dimensions that perceived AI use might affect, like originality, enjoyment, or even perceptions of the creator themselves. We therefore posited two main hypotheses. The first was that content will be evaluated more positively when the assigned creator, not the actual creator, involves a human than when their work is perceived to have been completely generated by an AI. And second, that the negative effects of AI use on perceptions will be stronger in objective high-risk contexts than in subjective low-risk contexts. For example, that people will care more about the use of AI for news articles than for jokes. To test this, we first created and ran a pre-experiment to develop our stimuli. We chose 5 contexts that we felt varied by level of risk and objectivity informed by prior work, so news, travel, health, jokes, and recipes. We then wrote 3 versions of content for each context, so 3 news articles, 3 recipes, and so on. We did this so that participants would be able to choose between versions as well as rate them individually. Here's a brief overview of the 3 versions we created for each context. As an example, we wrote 3 news articles describing different natural disasters. Here's the 3 versions of those news articles. To create them, we started with existing posts from Reuters and the New York Times, then copied their format and edited them to create material that was similar in length, language, level of detail, and context. We then presented these to participants. Each participant only evaluated one context, but saw all 3 versions of that context, so it was 5 3-condition within subjects experiments. Participants were provided with a brief introduction to set their context. For example, imagine that you're catching up on the news and see 3 breaking news stories about different natural disasters hitting the United States. After reading each, you will be asked a series of questions to evaluate it. Participants saw one version at a time, in random order, and for each version they were asked to rate the content on 7 scales of things like originality, trustworthiness, the effort put into creating the content, how qualified they thought the creator was to make the content, and satisfaction. They then saw all 3 versions and were asked to choose between them in context-specific questions. For example, if all of these were breaking news stories for today, which would you be most likely to share with someone else who was interested in the topics? We then followed these with basic demographic questions of age, gender, and the frequency with which they looked at content in each of the contexts. After data cleaning, we had around 200 to 250 participants for each context, for a total of almost 1,200. And as part of their demographic information, we asked about how frequently they looked at content in each of the contexts online. We did this based on prior work that suggested this might affect content perceptions. For example, if they have read a lot of jokes online, they might not view them as very original. We tested this demographic information as possible covariates in a linear regression. And we found that age and frequency of looking at context were significant predictors. More details on the directionality can be found in the paper. But basically, we use these as in a one-way ANCOVA to determine whether there were significant differences between versions in their individual ratings, accounting for age and context frequency. Next, I'll provide an overview of the highlights from the pre-experiment results, our conclusions, and how we modified our main experiment to better understand the differences we found. We found that for the most part, there were no significant differences between versions, particularly for travel and recipes. Participants thought that significantly more effort went into the planting tomatoes joke than the pirate joke, but the pirate joke was chosen as the most liked, funniest, and the version they were most likely to share. In the health context, participants felt that the creator was significantly more qualified to write the anxiety version than the burnout version, despite there being no creator listed in the pre-experiment. Because some of these findings were inconsistent, it was unclear if differences were caused by version or by other confounds like personal experiences with the topic, noise in the data, or type 1 errors. For our main experiment, we therefore added individual versions of the choice questions to see if their preferences were reflected when evaluating versions individually in a random order, and we added an open-ended question asking participants to explain what drove their choice. To address possible type 1 errors, we also attempted to replicate our results from our pre-experiment in our main experiment. So let's quickly go through how we set up that main experiment. To reduce complexity, we removed recipes from the main experiment, keeping travel, jokes, news, and health contexts. We added a random assigned creator to each context, with one labeled as by a human, one by a human with AI assistance, and one as AI generated. For author names, we chose gender-neutral first names combined with the most common last names in the US. Here's an example of what that looked like. As a reminder, even though we labeled versions as by a human, AI, or AI assisted, they were all human-generated. None were created using AI. We again had participants only evaluate one context, but they saw all three assigned creators. Participants saw one version at a time in random order and evaluated them on the same 7 scales from the pre-experiment with the addition of individual versions of the choice questions. They saw all 3 versions again and were asked to choose between them in context-specific questions. And we added 2 more open-ended questions to understand what they thought AI assistance and AI generated meant for the content creation process. Because prior work has suggested that the creator's identity may not be used as a signal for judging content credibility, we also added a multiple choice question about what differed between versions to explore how creator might be considered or noticed in a natural setting where it would be one of many possible signals. Finally, we collected the same demographics as in the pre-experiment. We found that age and frequency of looking at a context had similar effects as in our pre-experiment, and therefore used them as covariates. We performed a one-way ANCOVA with assigned creator and context as independent variables and question responses as dependent variables. After data cleaning, each context had around 375 to 440 participants for a total of around 1,600. And the frequency distributions of looking at each context were similar to the pre-experiment. When we attempted to replicate our results, we only found perceived effort between jokes to be significant. We therefore believe that most of the effects from the pre-experiment may have been from type 1 errors or noise in the data. The replication of findings for perceived effort in jokes led us to exclude it from our analysis. So let's talk about what we found. We found that participants reported significantly higher satisfaction with content that was presented as only human-created over purely AI-generated. The difference between purely human and AI assistance was marginal. When content was presented as human-created, the creator was perceived as significantly more qualified than when it was presented as a human with AI assistance or as AI-generated. And when content was presented as purely human-created, participants felt that the creator put significantly more effort into it than when it was presented as AI-generated and marginally more than a human with an AI assistance. So why the negative creator perceptions? We'll get a little bit more into the open-ended responses in a minute, but when we looked at participant comments, we saw a suggestion that participants felt AI use reflected badly on the creator's abilities or competence. For example, created by an incompetent illiterate, incapable of writing simple sentences, relying on AI instead. Or it means that John Doe isn't a competent writer. He needs the help of AI to add flair to his writing. Was version choice affected by assigned creator or context? We found that for the most part it was not. We only saw a marginal preference for a purely human creator in the health context. We found no significant effects of assigned creator on all other dimensions, including trustworthiness, originality, likelihood to share, or presentation quality, or in the individual versions of our choice questions. So why not? If assigned creator was not significantly affecting perceptions of content, what was? For this, we looked at our open-ended responses. We created a codebook of 7 main themes for why participants said they chose a version. For more detail, please see the paper. But in our inter-rater reliability analysis, with a 10% overlap of responses, we found substantial agreement between raters. We then aggregated these codes to identify what factors most influenced participant choices. And we found that the open-ended responses supported our findings, with almost no participants saying their decisions were based on the assigned creator. Instead, a majority of participants said their decisions were based on personal experiences, like interest in the topic, location, or sense of humor, or on the perceived level of detail, but there was no consistency in which version participants thought was the most detailed. So what did people think AI assistants or AI generated meant for the content creation process? Our codebook for analyzing these responses consisted of 5 main themes with 2 to 12 subthemes each, for a total of 27 codes. Our inter-rater reliability analysis again found substantial agreement between raters. From this analysis, we identified 5 main themes for what participants thought AI assistants and AI generated meant, largely based on when they thought work was handed off between the human and the AI. Due to time, I'm only going to walk through one of these, but you can read more about the others in the paper. When participants thought that the handoff was between the facts and the writing, participants said things like, the author asked Siri or Alexa or another AI platform about the subject matter. The AI pulls information from the web, so the author doesn't have to do as much, if any, research. In this case, a majority of participants thought that the AI provided or verified the facts, and the human did the writing, versus the other way around. In this category, we also saw an interesting division in mental models. Some participants explicitly described what they felt the use of AI meant for how factual the content was. When describing AI assistants, a majority said that AI assistants meant the content was less factual. But for AI-generated content, a majority of these participants said that they felt it made content more factual. When looking more closely at these comments, we saw some evidence that participants based their mental models off of existing technologies, associating AIs with computers and computers with being good at facts, not lying, and having full access to the internet, leading to the faulty conclusion that when something was purely AI-generated, it must be more factual. So to wrap things up, we found partial support for our first hypothesis. Contrary to our expectations, assigned creator had almost no effect on content judgments. However, perceived use of AI did have a negative effect on judgments of the creator. We only found minimal support for our second hypothesis, with no strong evidence that these effects were stronger in high-risk objective contexts. Our findings suggest that disclosure of AI use is unlikely to have the intended effect of leading users to more critically evaluate the credibility of content. Pushing to disclose AI use may instead lead to a false sense of security and a perception that the problem has been solved, without actually helping users to identify when content is misleading or not trustworthy. Our results also suggest that instead of affecting content judgments, disclosing AI use may instead negatively affect perceptions of creators. These negative effects may be increasingly important on social media platforms, where a good influencer-follower relationship can be critical to the creator's ability to monetize their work. We also saw that participant interpretations for what AI use meant in the context of content creation were extremely variable and grounded in existing technologies, which could sometimes lead to faulty conclusions, such as equating AI to computers and computers to be more factual and accurate, therefore assuming AI-generated content is more factual and accurate, the opposite of the intended effect of labeling when AI is used. We believe our findings suggest a real opportunity for the HCI community to help guide the conversation with regulators and companies. Rather than focusing on labeling content as AI-assisted or AI-generated, our community might be able to develop better measures for helping users understand the magnitude or impact AI edits have on the content credibility, originality, presentation, or other dimensions. Our study had a number of limitations, which we hope will be addressed in future work. We view our findings as a snapshot of how assigned creator affects perceptions now, and with the rapid development of AI, attitudes may change, and our work could be used as a benchmark for understanding future shifts. Finally, our results were from a single item measurements with weak effect sizes. However, we believe the consistency of our findings and the additional data points provided by our qualitative analysis support the validity of our work. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so excited to have shared this work with you. Thank you very much.